Hello, and welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
This is the podcast about murders and so much more. We will talk about anything strange, anything that goes bump in the night, and pretty much anything that amuses us.
And on that note, we need to mention that this podcast is not safe for work or delicate ears, so do be discerning who you listen to it with.
We also want to let you know that you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, so look for us there.
I am Shannon Lawrence. I am a writer, mom, wife, student, procrastinator, and you can find me at thewarriormuse.com.
My name is MB Partlow. I am a writer, an avid reader, an organizer extraordinaire, a mom to kids, cats, and a dog, and I call bullshit when I see it.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the insanity.
That's right. Like you're not used to it already. We are here today with Patrick Hester. We have a guest. We've known him forever. So,
how long have we known you?
You, MB, and I met. So Shannon and I met at Writers Fest in Manitou Springs.
Oh, right.
And MB, we met at a writer's retreat in Poudre Canyon.
Was that the first time I met you?
Yes, because everybody kept saying, there's someone who wants to talk to you about Pikes Peak Writers Conference.
Oh. That sounds right.
Jesus, did I talk about anything else?
So Writers Fest was 2011?
Yeah, Author Fest.
Author Fest, that's what it was, yes.
Because then they tried to make me run it the next year. Yeah, I think so.
I think it was 2011. And then the Poudre Canyon retreat was Deb Courtney's retreat. And I want to say that was 1 or 2 years after that.
There were some interesting people working at the bar. I think all of them into various pieces of fiction.
There was also some very interesting people at the retreat.
Yep.
We won't go into that, though.
What happens at the retreat stays at the retreat.
It does.
I rented a cabin, so I was off by myself.
Jealous. That's what we should have done. Yeah.
Yep.
We would now.
Yes. Now that we know.
All right. Well, Patrick.
And knowing is half the battle. Sorry.
Dun, 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 dun. Hey, introduce yourself to our audience, please.
I'm Patrick Hester. I'm an author. I am a 2-time Hugo Award winner for podcasting and editing on a fanzine, which was a website, sfsignal.com. That's also where I got my Hugo for podcasting. I mostly write science fiction and fantasy. I have a book that was published a few years back called Samantha Kane Into the Fire. It's an urban fantasy set in Denver. I've also gotten a few short stories out there and a couple of anthologies, but it's been a while since I've done anything like that. I produced and hosted the SF Signal podcast from September 2010 through May of 2016. That's the one I won a Hugo for. And I've been doing the Functional Nerds podcast for almost 11 years. We recently passed 500 episodes. And I'm on my second host. So the first host had to leave for family reasons. He and his wife had a second child and he had some health issues, John Emilio, so he ended up leaving. And I brought Tracy Townsend on board, who is an academic. She's a teacher. She is a writer in her own right. She's got a couple of books out there. And like I said, we just passed 500 episodes. And before that, I produced I Should Be Writing for Merle Lafferty for several years. So I've been doing podcasting for about 11 years now.
Forever.
I'm sorry?
Forever.
Yeah. And one thing, I almost always end up on the podcasting panels at conventions where a lot of folks come and they ask questions about, how to podcast and should I podcast? You guys have been in that audience before and you've heard me say, no, for God's sakes, don't start a podcast. And you did it anyway.
Oh,
yep.
We do what we want.
They just eat up so much time.
They do.
So at one point I was doing 8 hours on Sunday, just editing audio for all the various podcasts. So I don't recommend that. Unless you're getting paid, which no one ever is.
No.
I got asked the other day
what famous people who start podcasts.
I got asked what recording equipment and what studio we record our podcast in. And I was like, my co-host does all that herself.
of her office.
I have done a lot over the years. I started with just a simple USB mic, and I was using GarageBand because it came free on my Mac. I have upgraded over the years. I use Amadeus Pro, if anybody cares, and I use Zencaster, and I have a Blue Yeti. So Zencaster is really cool. You guys are using Zoom, nothing wrong with that. And Zencaster does a similar thing, except it exports all the tracks out for you separately so that everybody has their own track, and it can do the video as well. And I just use that because it's easy.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I will say that the host that we went with, Buzzsprout, has a lot of good information, and they don't just say use this one. They're like, hey, here are these ones, here's their costs, you can run the gamut, and they give you pros and cons of everything. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I've heard you guys talk about them before. It sounds like they're a great platform. You do have to be careful sometimes. I started out with Podbean, and oh my God, are they horrible. I do not recommend Podbean to anybody anymore. It's like a guy in his garage, and it was just terrible. So just do a little research, and sometimes it depends on the kind of computer you have. So Mac versus PC.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, the other question I always get asked is, how do you monetize your podcast? How do you make money? Be famous first.
Yeah. Oh, that's what we did wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to, what is it, Smartless, and it's got 3 well-known actors on it, and they have sponsorships galore, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
love you guys, but fuck you.
And we mentioned plenty of brand names in hopes that someone will want to sponsor us.
I've only ever gotten 2 sponsorships in 11 years. So are you ready to revisit a prior topic from one of your past episodes?
What? Maybe.
DC movies?
What? Oh, no. This is the proof right here.
I just wanted to say, I was listening to you guys talk about it. and I feel, me personally, that the reason they suck so hard is because they lack heart and respect for the characters and for the fans.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't have someone guiding it the way other things do. So if you look at the DC animated universe, you've got Bruce Timm guiding it. He loves the characters. He loves the history. He loves all of it. He brings in, he'll be doing a story, and then he brings in this random seeming character, but it's because he loves that character. Like the Question, right? The Question suddenly shows up in DC Unlimited, or Justice League Unlimited. So you don't have that Kevin Feige character or that Dave Filoni character in the behind the scenes guiding everything. If you don't know who Filoni is, he's the guy that's guiding all the television properties for Star Wars, right? He did Clone Wars, Rebels. He's been part of Favreau's The Mandalorian, all that stuff. Because they don't have that, they just suck. It's like Zack Snyder hated Superman. So why would you let him do a Superman movie? That's like letting J.J. Abrams do a Star Trek movie. Oh, wait.
Lens flare. It's true that when you're watching Marvel, it's like one big private joke that everybody's in on, basically, who watches it. So everybody gets pulled in and made a part of it.
Yeah. And Marvel didn't do Iron Man and then immediately jump to Civil War.
Right.
And then do Avengers.
Right. Well,
that would have been a hot mess. But no one at Warner Brothers DC got that memo.
They said, so we just have to do a quick couple of movies, and then we need to Superman versus Batman, and
we're gonna do the Dark Knight Returns as part of that.
Yeah.
But we're going to skip all the history and the relationships that the characters in the comics had to get to that point. We're going to skip all of that
whole arc so that you care about the characters, and it bothers you that they're fighting instead of not giving a shit.
Exactly. I mean, it was just
whatever.
It was just a mess. It was just such a mess. And I heard you guys talking about it, and I'm sitting there. It's funny because years ago when I did SF Signal, I would do an episode, and then I would get, because we had a voicemail line for a short time. And the only person who ever used the voicemail line was Gail Carriger. And Gail would call and go, "Oh my God, Patrick, I was shouting at my phone listening to you because you got this all wrong. And I wanted to tell you this." And that's how she actually became an irregular on the show. She would get invited to come on the show because it was driving her. But I was listening to that and I'm like, it's because they don't care. They don't care. That's why they suck.
They just think they're going to make money and ride the coattails because they saw it happen successfully.
Although watching Henry Cavill punch Ben Affleck in the face was highly enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I have said and have pissed a lot of people off with this statement, but Ben Affleck has ruined everything he's ever touched, including Jennifer Garner.
Well, I can't disagree with you. Yeah. Because what was it? It was that I watched. It was Chasing Amy that I watched. I don't know, the last half or whatever of, because my husband was watching it when I got home from something. And I was just like, I believe this may be the origin of when I started to hate him and want to stab him in the face every time I saw him. This is it. Because he was so horrible. And of course, the movie, I was already like on it. Because I sat down. It's funny because I sat down and I turned to Jeff and I was, oh, this is such and such. And I was like, wait, is she 90 movies lesbian or is she an actual lesbian? I was like, I don't remember because I'd seen it back in whatever, 90s, 2000s, whenever it came out. And he was like, I'm not sure. And I'm like, I bet she's a 90s movie lesbian. And she was, because the magical dick cured her of her lesbianness. And therefore she was 90s movie lesbian. Because she wasn't.
I just started, that made me think, I just started reading a book, which I won't reference because I've only read like 25 pages. But you start out and there are these two women in this town and one of them is talking about, you're in one of them's head and she's thinking about how she's so strongly attracted to this person and she can never tell anyone. And it's a big secret and nobody can ever know. And I got all excited because I thought, oh my God, she's attracted to this woman who she's kind of built up as her nemesis. And I'm like, oh, but they're secretly attracted to each other. This is going to be such a, no. There's magic penises abounding in this book. Penai.
So as a nice little segue, I was painting a room blue yesterday, and I had the big roller, and then I had the little roller, right? The little roller. And after I'm done, you got to rinse those off. So I'm in the stainless steel sink, and I'm rinsing off the little one, and I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm sitting there going, "This looks like a Smurf penis." So that's out there for the world now.
I'm going to just bite my tongue and let that go right on by.
There weren't any peni in the Smurfs that I watched, but there apparently was an explicit version.
If you, at a certain point in time in the early 80s, if you subscribed to National Lampoon, at one point they included a pull-out poster that had strawberry shortcake and a Smurf.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, I'll just leave the rest of it. It was as nasty as you think it is. Right. It was. And I looked at it and I went, I'm not the audience for that. On any level.
That was the whole early fan shipping and whatnot.
Oh, they perhaps. Were, yeah.
I hear about those communities online. I haven't been to them, but of course I've been told about the supernatural ones repeatedly. Yes. And I'm like, that's great, but I don't actually ship any of the characters. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I ship one of them with me. Not with the other characters. Sorry.
It's the Sheriff Jody, isn't it?
Jodes,
the Jodester, Jodio. That episode, it just makes me crack up to just even think about it.
We love a good accent. All right. So we actually, because we usually keep it a little short when we have guests at the beginning.
Oh, well.
Throw that out the window. So we're going to go ahead and get started and be starting today.
I am going to start because we kind of have a little theme going. So
we do. One of us has had to stretch it to meet the theme, but
because I will say Patrick told us what he wanted to talk about. So I said, then I have to do H.H. Holmes, who is sometimes called the first American serial killer.
I was surprised because, I mean, maybe people don't understand that before we started this podcast, you did not want to hear about serial killers. So thing too, and I had to like quietly talk about it over here and be like, sorry, but we have something else we want to talk about. Sorry. And then now you're doing H.H. Holmes.
Well,
a sadistic motherfucker.
Yes, he certainly was. So my sources were Wikipedia. What a surprise that is. A book, Devil in the White City by Eric Larson.
That's a good one.
It was a very good book. If you're interested in the topic, I highly recommend you look it up. History.com and allthatisinteresting.com. Look, I took your advice and I pulled up.
Yay, good girl.
I'm old, but I'm slow. So H.H. Holmes. So he was born Herman Webster Mudgett. That just trips off the tongue. He was born in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, descended from the original English settlers of the area. His parents were Methodists. I don't know why I felt I needed to include that.
I don't know. It's often put out there for stuff, and it's.
Sometimes I start writing and then I go back and I don't take out all the stuff I don't need. But they were fairly well-to-do farmers. He had an older brother and sister and a younger brother and sister.
He was middle child. That explains everything.
It kind of does. But there wasn't the one article, the really in-depth piece I read said there really wasn't any evidence that he behaved the way people expect serial killers to behave when they're younger. He wasn't abused by his father. He wasn't torturing animals. He wasn't doing anything like that. So he, graduated high school. He taught for a little while. He got married at the age of 17 to Clara Lovering, and they had a son, Robert. I'm like, why did people keep procreating with this man? And
charming.
He must have been. Although I'll bring it up later because I have a note to bring it up later. He graduated in 1884 from the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. And his wife, Clara, who apparently got tired of the domestic abuse, left him before he divorced. And she and the son went back to New Hampshire, and she had nothing to do with him for the rest of her life or his life.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Right? She made the right decision. Now, he later admitted, and he was the kind of guy who would commit crimes and just leave town.
Yeah.
So, but when he later admitted to using cadavers to defraud life insurance companies while in med school and to other schemes such as promising to marry rich widows to get their money or selling cadavers to medical students. He continues that. That's a sideline. It's like Amway. He just keeps
keep this one, give this one away.
So something that just cracked me up. In 1886, he married a woman named Myrta Belknap, and he filed for divorce from Clara after he married the second woman, alleging infidelity on her part. So it was never proved, and the suit was dropped. And there's no proof that Clara ever even knew he was trying to divorce her or that he was trying to sue her. So Holmes and wife number 2 did have a daughter in 1889 named Lucy. Then in 1886, August of 1886, he arrives in Chicago. And this is where the bulk of the story takes place. This is where the murder castle is built. He found work originally in Elizabeth Holton's drugstore, which he does eventually buy. And contrary to some of the stories that you hear, he did not kill Holton or her husband. Her husband was a doctor and had actually graduated from the same med school. It wasn't called a med school back then, but same place. They both graduated from the same place, and they may have crossed paths while they were in school. So he didn't kill them. I mean, he killed a lot of other people, don't get me wrong, just not those two in particular. So he buys an empty lot across the street from the drugstore, and he begins construction on a mixed-use building. That's my term. That's not what they called it back then. So the first floor is going to have shops because the World's Fair is coming to Chicago, and this is a big, fat, hairy deal. And actually, next week, I'm going to be talking about something else related to the World's Fair, although it's much lighter and funnier than this topic.
I want the World's Fair back.
That would be interesting. So because there's so many businesses, I mean, Chicago is a hub and it's growing anyway, but they're going to have the World's Fair. There's all these people coming in. So the first floor of this building is going to be shop fronts. And then there are going to be apartments on the second floor. So after a while, he's got this building going up and he hasn't paid the architect or the steel company. So they sued him. But swindling his suppliers is a solid habit with him. It doesn't matter what part of the country he's in or what he's doing. He keeps switching architects and switching suppliers and switching furniture supply so he doesn't have to pay them.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's just a class act all the way around. So a man named Ned Connor, when Holmes opened his own pharmacy, Ned Connor was working at the jewelry counter, which I didn't know they had jewelry counters at pharmacies, but I learned something. So there you go. So when Ned discovers that his wife, Julia, is having an affair with Holmes, Ned quits his job and leaves. He leaves Julia and their daughter, Pearl, living at the hotel. They disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1891, and no one ever saw them again. Holmes said later that she died during a botched abortion, but nobody knows for sure. And apparently nobody even looked for Pearl. She just disappeared. Nobody cared. Nobody did anything about it. So a woman named Emmeline Segrand started working in the building in 1892, and she disappeared in December of that year. She was also suspected of being a paramour of Holmes. I love that word. And I cannot figure out what the attraction. He had to have had like a Ted Bundy charm. Looking. He had a mustache that looked like a push broom. It was enormous and bushy, and Shannon is now interrogating me. So yeah, he's got this big, and I will include the photograph.
Yeah, but perhaps that was a manly mustache at the time.
Perhaps. How could you? Yeah, anyway. I'm like, how could anybody kiss that face? How could you get close enough to kiss that face?
It depends if they like the smell of sandwich.
What I think is funny is that you thought we would get this done in like 60 minutes. When have the three of us ever gotten together and gotten, through something in 60 minutes? I mean,
collectively and in a short time period.
Never. Okay, so 1892, Holmes adds a third floor to the building, which is, he tells all his financial backers it's going to be used as apartments for the upcoming World's Fair. And that's how he gets all the support, because that took place in 1893. So by the end of 1892, the hotel is partially complete. And the first floor, the storefronts, those are all good to go. But it was the second and third floor. I mean, he's got an apartment there somewhere, but it's like a horror movie in that there were chutes that fed into the basement, and the hallways were mazes. They led to nowhere, or you'd get a staircase that led up to nowhere. There were soundproofed rooms and dead ends. And there's been some controversy about, did he actually have all this? Was all this real, or was it sensationalism? But what was very real was in the basement. He had a much more interesting basement than I do. It had vats of acid and quicklime and a crematorium for the home enthusiast.
You don't have a crematorium?
I do
in your
not.
Huh. It's an odd choice.
I know. There was a time when he refused to pay for furniture that had been delivered, and the merchants waited until he was out and came and searched the hotel. You think bill collectors are bad calling you? These people went there. They found this furniture tucked away in hidden rooms and hallways. So that's how this first got out. This is how this first started to circulate. So they went public with the discovery and actually cost him financial backers for the hotel. Now, at some point in Chicago, Holmes meets and befriends a carpenter named Benjamin Petezel, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. I said, enter the henchman or the minion, take your pick. But this was the guy. This was his partner in crime. Although, Holmes was the one in control.
So this was his Watson?
This was his. No, Watson was much smarter than that. You know what happened to Petezel? Hold on. Early in 1893, Holmes meets Minnie Williams when she moved to Chicago from Texas. Texas is important. He hired her as his personal stenographer. Apparently, he had several personal stenographers over the year. Uh-huh. Nobody thought to question where they all went. In April, he convinced her to deed over some Fort Worth property to one of his aliases. Then in May, they posed as a married couple and rented an apartment together. I think her family thought they were married. She may have thought they were married for all we know. Her sister Annie came to visit and wrote home that she was going to travel with her dear brother Harry. And neither one was ever seen alive after July 5th of that year. In 1894, the police finally go in to search the hotel while Holmes is out. And they do find, according to the police report, they found hinged walls and false partitions and secret passageways and airtight rooms. So it was not, what's the movie with Johnny Depp, the barber?
Oh, the Fleet Street one.
Yeah. Okay. Unlike that, there are no meat pies involved in this one, although there are the chutes going into the basement.
That's a whole different serial killer.
It really is. He had surgical tables down there and medical equipment. Again, much more interesting than my basement. Here's the thing though. Not only was he killing people, he was selling the organs and the bones to medical institutions and on the black market. I didn't know there was a black market for such things, but there you go. So I guess that means there could be meat pies involved somewhere, but nobody followed that up. So I can't accurately make that claim.
Perhaps.
How about inaccurately?
Yeah.
I can't factually make that claim. That's the word I want. Also of note, in 1894, he married again. No, he hadn't divorced anyone. He married Georgiana Yoke. After he was arrested, not for anything, not for murder. He was arrested because of defrauding all these companies.
Yeah.
A fire of unknown origin gutted the hotel. So he fled Chicago, where the insurance companies are like banging on his door. And as I've just said, they're going in and looking around. So he goes to Texas, where he had inherited the property of the two sisters, Minnie and Annie. He starts running into the same issues. He's trying to build a building for business, and he's trying to bilk his suppliers again. And for some reason, they catch on a lot quicker in Texas, which is pretty surprising considering how backward they are.
But they're savvy.
So there was no evidence of foul play in the building there. He was arrested and briefly jailed in Texas. And while he was incarcerated, he met up with someone who talked to him about what a great idea it was to take out a life insurance policy on himself and fake his own death. Is there a crime he didn't commit? I just picture him pushing over little old ladies in the street and kicking dogs. I mean, really. So his first attempt failed. And so he convinces his friend Patezel to make the next try. So Patezel was supposed to buy the policy and fake his death. And then his wife would split the money with Holmes. And they had a lawyer who was helping him with this, a dirty lawyer. So Patezel set up this identity as an inventor. And what was he doing? He was stealing the patents for other people's work. I mean, these are just such jolly, happy people. So he was going to fake his own death in a laboratory explosion. And Holmes, who had all these cadavers, was going to provide one of the right size and shape to take the place of Patezel. But Holmes probably figured, why bother? Well, why bother lugging a dead body when I can just kill the person in front of me? So he did. He chloroformed Patezel and then set him on fire. But the evidence isn't clear on whether the chloroform was applied before or after he was set on fire. Yeah, so yes, he may have been awake while he was set on fire.
But what would be the point in applying the chloroform after?
I have no idea.
Maybe the screaming and shouting got too bad and he just wanted him to shut up.
Maybe it's flammable. I don't know. So
sleep now.
So Holmes did collect the life insurance money by conning Patezel's widow. Then he convinces her to travel to Canada with him. Mm-hmm. But first he convinces her to give him custody of 3 of her children. She had 5 children, so she kept the baby and the oldest daughter with her. And he has the 3 middle children, and they're traveling to Canada. During this trip to Canada, I'm waving my arms now. I've gotten right into this. During the trip to Canada, he's still living with his 3rd wife, who has no idea what's going on. I can't even imagine how unaware and observant she must have been.
He was the patriarch and she
spiritual
was not
leader.
to ask questions.
That's true. So after settling in Toronto in his rental house, Holmes later confessed that he had locked the two daughters in a trunk and gassed them to death before burning their naked bodies in the cellar of his rented home.
Yeah.
So
it's always the sadder part.
Yeah. So back in the US, he poisoned Petezel's son and then chopped the body up, and they found teeth and bones in the chimney of the house where he was staying. He was finally arrested by Pinkerton detectives in Boston in November of 1894. Because they thought he was a flight risk, they were able to hold him on a warrant for horse theft in Texas.
That's serious.
That's a big deal in Texas.
Yeah. Right?
That's a real big deal in Texas. Even today, it's like huge.
Right. So never mind, numerous women have disappeared. It wasn't until he killed a man. Wasn't until he killed a man that they did anything about it, and they held him on charges of horse theft.
I mean, you speak as if women have value.
I don't know what I was thinking.
Silly.
Apparently, when they did search the castle in Chicago, and they couldn't find enough evidence to link him to convict him. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He was put on trial for the murder of Petezel and was convicted and sentenced to death, after which he confessed to 27 murders and 6 attempted murders. So they set the number of people he killed, that Holmes killed, at somewhere between 9 and 200. Because he made all these outrageous claims after he was arrested. Some of the people he claimed to have killed were still alive.
Yeah.
And didn't even know that they were supposed to be dead. How rude. And his stories just got more outrageous after Hearst newspapers paid him $7,500 for his confession. So he claimed he was possessed by Satan. He also claimed that suffocation was his murder method of choice, using chloroform, fumes from the gas used to power the lamps. Mm-hmm. Like he would build airtight rooms and turn the gas on and not light them, or he would lock victims in an airtight chamber so the air would run out. He also claims to have starved some victims and burned some alive in his castle. So he was hanged in May of 1896. It was a week before his 35th birthday. So he was a busy little fuck.
Yes. Just think, as entrepreneurial as he was, what he could have actually accomplished if he wasn't psychotic.
Yeah. He got so much done. Yeah. Why did it all have to be so fucked up? Here's the nice ironic twist. When they hanged him, his neck didn't break. Mm-hmm. So he strangled slowly to death. I like that. I'm like, you caused all this pain?
I just heard about an executioner, and I wish I had missed the names and I have to look them up, but he would stand on people's shoulders or walk across their shoulders when he was hanging them, trying to break their necks so they'd go fast.
Oh my God.
I was like,
yikes,
dude, you got into this for one reason, didn't you? Oh, just made me think of that.
But
to stand on the shoulders of lesser men.
That's right. That's part of it.
Ew. So yes, while Holmes / Mudgett was, as I said earlier, he's definitely guilty of at least 9 murders, and the rest are speculation. Even people who have researched and written books, because there have been a lot of books written on the subject. I really like the Erik Larson book because it's a nonfiction book that reads like a novel, because it combines the story of the World's Fair with the story of him building this place, and how there was this huge influx of people into Chicago. And a fair number of these people were unchaperoned, unsuspecting, not worldly young women who were looking for jobs and a place to stay. And he apparently was very charming and would allow them in. And that was a big mistake.
And who knows how many actually went missing during this huge.
So many people went missing during the World's Fair. It would be nice to attach them all to him, but you can't say he was the only person taking advantage of these people. No. And yellow journalism was a very big thing back then. That was when newspapers just made shit up. Yeah, because they don't do that now.
What?
I know, right? They exaggerated or just completely made stuff up to sell papers. Does anybody listening even remember what newspapers are?
Yes, I've been getting one for weeks that I didn't even order.
Are you still getting it?
No, they finally stopped, but I basically had to call them, and then they admitted that they didn't get paid. So that was the reason they stopped. Until that point, they were continuing to send me the paper every single day, convinced that there was a secret extra space somewhere in my house called Section A, where someone lived who had ordered this paper.
Well, obviously, those were the people in your attic.
Yeah.
I don't have enough room in my attic for me.
So I'm going to add one last note. Patrick Quinlan was the former caretaker of the castle, and he was, except for Holmes, he was the man who knew, the one person who knew the most about what went on there, how it was set up. He knew everything about the interior of this castle. Mm-hmm. He committed suicide in 1914, and he left a suicide note that was one sentence long. I could not sleep.
I seem to recall also that when Holmes was in prison, his jailers quite liked him too, because he was that charismatic.
It just astounds me that he could be that charismatic.
It repeatedly does with these people, though. Yes. Like Kemper, everybody just loved that guy. He was a good guy. He convinced women who knew there was a serial killer taking them from the campus to get in his car.
Like, Ted Bundy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, it astounds me that there are people with that level of charisma that they can be liked no matter what they're doing.
Charles Manson.
We see it.
I was just going to say the same thing. Lots of stories about Charles Manson being very charismatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was not, So that is the story of the house built to entrap and torture and kill people.
The murder castle. I'm sad that there's not actually a murder castle still. That you can go tour.
I'm going to have to post photos because I have to post I'm making a note to myself. Because there are photos of him, obviously, but there are also blueprints. Yeah. And there are several different sets. So again, I don't know who drew them up.
Because he kept changing it and he kept working with different people and he kept this and that. So I don't know if it's a collection of them or put together or what.
Well, one has all of like the murder rooms marked out and I was like, really? I find that one hard to believe, but I'll post it.
Well, right. But I feel like that would have been, again, this one, that's part of why he went through so many contractors is, all right, I'm going to have them work on this. And then they'll have this one weird room, but they're not going to see that there are 20 or whatever of these weird rooms. And so that way he could bring them in and nobody could get too suspicious.
And actually the chute that went into the basement was not uncommon in those days. It's not uncommon now. People have a chute that goes down for the laundry. Yeah. So
he just wanted it a little extra big.
Yeah. I have very big loads of laundry.
They're body sized. I needed a little bigger, please.
We have all king size beds. So the sheets are huge.
That's right. And comforters. We need to be able to throw those down and rug.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Now was that story part of the inspiration for like Psycho?
Psycho, no, but there was, I glossed over it, but it's influenced a lot of. Actually, it influenced a book by Robert Bloch who wrote Psycho, but it wasn't Psycho. It was something he wrote before that. And damned if I can remember the name of it.
I wonder if it was as problematic as Psycho.
It's but it's also been, we've all seen it referenced in TV shows.
Well, yeah, sure. Anything that it's here's this murder hotel and here's this murder house and here's anything like that. Yeah. He's probably taken inspiration from it. So it was creative. He probably could have actually made, though, a shit ton of money just renting out rooms to people during the World's Fair.
He could have.
That's stuff that always blows me away. Any kind of criminal that fleeces people, and you're like, you've put so much effort and so much mental energy into doing this thing, and you could have been doing this legitimately.
Yeah, all that creativity
without the cost. So
you originally said that there was supposed to be shops. Did the shops ever happen?
I believe I think there were. He was supposed to open a pharmacy over there.
I figured it would have been a hot dog stand.
Meat pies.
Meat pies.
All right, Patrick. It's all you now.
Well, I guess the theme was houses. Is that where you went?
I did. Yes, that's where I went.
Okay. So
Houses. Dead house.
So basically what I went with is the Winchester Mystery House, or as I remember it, the Winchester Madhouse. And I don't know why I remember it that way, but I do. My sources, since I had to have sources, are my brain, Wikipedia, Google Foo, Atlas Obscura, Patch.com, and the truth about SarahWinchester.com.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So lots of stuff going on there. You guys know this, but maybe your listeners don't. I grew up in Fresno, California, and a couple times every year, my grandmother and I would get on a Greyhound bus, and we would head to San Jose to stay for a week or two with my eldest aunt and her family. And on the road, I would always see the billboards, right? Winchester Mystery House, come to the Winchester Mystery House. And I swear they said Madhouse, but apparently I'm wrong. I don't know. Anyway, I would see those billboards and I always wanted to go. And my aunt and uncle would ask us when we got there, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to do this? You want to do that? And I would always say, I want to go to the Winchester Mystery House. And I don't know if it was too expensive or if it was just creepy and they didn't want to go, but we never, ever went. Never got to go to the Winchester Mystery House. So that just means that it's kind of been kept alive in my memory as this super creepy, kooky thing that I've always wanted to know more about. And this gave me the opportunity to read about it. William Wirt Winchester, Wirt, W-I-R-T, which is a weird spelling, married Sarah Pardee Lockwood on September 30th, 1862. They had one daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, who was born on June 15th, 1866, and died just a month later on July 25th, 1866, of marasmus, which is a form of severe malnutrition characterized by energy deficiency because the body is unable to metabolize proteins.
Oh.
It can occur in anyone with severe malnutrition, but it usually occurs in young children and babies, which is really sad. William Winchester was the only son and heir of Oliver Winchester, owner of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, creators of the repeating rifle family of weapons, most famously the Model 1873, which became known as the gun that won the West, or the gun that killed like lots and lots of people. Oliver Winchester died in December 1880, and his son William inherited the company. But he was sick. He was already sick. And he ended up dying of tuberculosis just 4 months after his dad. And Sarah, his widow, inherited, and this is going to blow your mind a little bit, she inherited $20 million.
Wow.
Which is the equivalent to $536 million today.
Wow.
And 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. That provided her with roughly $1,000 a day.
And she just lost her daughter and her husband.
Yes. And in today's money, that's 27 grand a day.
Wow.
So I'm not shitting here. She was Scrooge McDuck rich. If she wanted to, she could have totally afforded a giant vault filled with gold coins to swim in.
I was going to say, she was doing some DuckTales shit. Like, they never mentioned that gold room in the Winchester Mansion, but
she totally could have had it if she wanted it. This being the late 19th century, mysticism was all the rage. Mm-hmm. People were holding seances. They were practicing magic. They were participating in all sorts of rituals. You had famous folks like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife and Harry Houdini, who were openly investigating the paranormal and joining secret societies. It was really the in thing to do if you were anybody. So it's no surprise that Sarah Winchester, being who she was and where she was in society, would attend a seance in hopes of speaking with her dead husband. As the legend goes, a medium in Boston was able to channel William, who told Sarah that she needed to go west and build a home for herself and for the spirits of the people who died at the end of a Winchester rifle. Now, other reports of that seance say that Sarah already believed her family to be haunted and her fortune to be cursed by the ghosts. And that in when the medium channeled William, he actually warned her that not only did she need to do that. But it was the only way that she would survive and continue living was if she went and built a home to hide herself from the ghosts. So 2 different versions of that story there, depending on where you go. The timeline is also a little bit different. Wikipedia actually has different pages with different dates on it for the same things. So that's always fun. But we know that in 1885, after a few years abroad in Europe, Sarah moved to California. And in 1886, she purchased either 140 or 161 acres of land, depending on the source. That was called Lanada Villa, the majority of which is now downtown Los Altos, California. She also purchased, as part of that, an unfinished farmhouse that would eventually become the Winchester Mansion. Sarah hired carpenters, but no architect. She did all the designs herself, but she never committed them to paper. So you were talking about there was architectural designs of the Holmes building. There are none surviving of the Winchester house.
Wow.
She did all the designs herself, and then construction began. It continued, again, depending on who you talk to, nearly nonstop until her death on September 5th, 1922, at 10:45 p.m. from heart failure. She was 83 years old. And legend has it that she died. Someone went and told the workers, and they basically just dropped their tools right where they were standing and walked away. They left nails half hammered in, bits of construction unfinished, you name it, they just left it and they walked away. Some say the construction never stopped in the 38 years, but there are conflicting reports, including one that quotes Sarah as saying that she had stopped it occasionally for her own peace of mind because it was driving her nuts.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that. Could you
Yeah.
imagine perpetually living in construction with all that noise?
And so it all depends on what you read from where. She actually owned other properties as well that she would stay out from time to time. She had a boat that was called the Ark of Sarah. And she would go out and stay on the boat sometimes. And so she didn't continuously live in a house. The home itself contains numerous oddities, such as doors and stairways that go nowhere, windows overlooking other rooms, and stairs with odd-sized risers or steps. Some say these features were designed by Sarah to confuse the ghosts who haunted the place, that she built it as a maze of confusing twists and turns to gain peace from the ghosts who were haunting her. Some say they were tormenting her. Reportedly, she slept in a different room every night, and only one of the toilets in the house actually worked because all the others were decoys intended to confuse the ghosts.
But the ghosts don't need to use the bathroom.
I don't know. This is the logic that she had in there. The odd-sized risers or the height of the steps, they figured out was actually due to Sarah's debilitating arthritis. She could only lift her feet a few inches off the ground. And so a normal step was too high for her. So she actually designed the steps to be much, much shallower, not as high, so that she could go anywhere in the house unhindered and without anybody helping her. And she would wander the house all the time. She did have a dedicated bedroom, but she got trapped in it at one point during the earthquake. And so that's when she started moving rooms. She didn't like to stay in that room anymore. She had a room dedicated to seances in the mansion, and often would hold a seance and commune with the ghosts who haunted the place. One legend says that the ghosts themselves would come to her during the seances and tell her how to build out the house, and that she would take that feedback back to the contractors and say, now you need to do this, or now you need to do that. That included a room that had no floor, no ceiling, and was tucked between her bedroom and the seance room itself. So just basically, huge open space. More odd designs included the building of trapdoors, secret passages, a skylight in the floor, spiderweb windows, and staircases, again, that led to nowhere. There are also doors that opened to blank walls, a dangerous door on the second floor that opens out into the yard below. There are tiny doors that lead to large spaces, and large doors that lead to very small spaces. Some of them you can't even go through. You can just see the room beyond. Now, there is an alternate theory on the Winchester House's design, and that's that Sarah was creating a puzzle full of encryptions inspired by the work of English philosopher Francis Bacon. This theory suggests that Sarah, being who she was and being a part of society and at a specific tier of society, was a member of some sort of mystic society like the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons or the co-Freemasons, which was actually all the rage in Europe at the time that she was traveling in Europe. And the co-Freemasons would actually admit women. The Freemasons were known not to.
Right.
Except there were occasions when someone of a certain stature got in. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that she was a Freemason, that she got in, and that she used mathematics and symbols throughout the house that you would normally see in Freemasonry. There are symbols hidden in the ballroom that people have identified. There's the Shakespeare windows that use quotes from Shakespeare. There's the iron gates. And all of these things combined create some sort of puzzle that you're supposed to solve. What happens when you solve it, I don't know. Part of this theory is that she was obsessed with the number 13, and that can be seen everywhere throughout the Winchester house. 13 is normally an unlucky number, but it's also a prime number. She has 13 paned windows and 13 step stairways, including one where the 13th step is actually behind the door. And supposedly the door can only be opened like through divine intervention or prayer. Some closets have 13 hooks in them. There is 13 blue and amber stones in a special window that she designed. There's 13 ceiling panels in the entranceway, 13 windows in the 13th bathroom. The spider web patterns often have 13 in the windows.
She had a bathroom big enough for 13 windows.
Yes.
And I'm just angry.
Even her will had 13 parts to it, and she signed it 13 times.
Oh, so nobody at any point suggested that maybe Sarah was just tripping balls when she.
Yes, that's actually the third theory, is that she was just crazy.
Okay.
Now, Sarah was a child prodigy, which just leads credence to this theory of symbology and puzzles. By the age of 12, she was already fluent in Latin, French, Spanish, and Italian. She had an intimate knowledge of the classics, most notably Homer and Shakespeare, and along with a remarkable talent as a musician. So she was a child prodigy. She was very intelligent. She was raised and educated in an environment ripe with Freemasonic and Rosicrucian philosophy. Several of Sarah's uncles and cousins were Freemasons, again, leading people to believe that maybe she had gotten in and became a Freemason. At an early age, she was admitted to Yale's only female scholastic institution, known as the Young Ladies Collegiate Institute. Two of the school's most influential administrators and professors, Judson A. Root and his brother, N.W. Taylor Root, were both Rose Crux Freemasons, I think is how it's pronounced. In addition to the liberal arts, the Roots also set forth a strict curriculum consisting of the sciences and mathematics. So this just all leads into the Freemasonry kind of aspect of this. Like 13, the prime numbers 7 and 11 are also seated throughout the house. These numbers consistently show up in the number of windows in many of the rooms, or the number of stairs in the staircases, or the rails and the railings, or the number of panels in the floors and walls, or lights in the chandelier, etc. So all these prime numbers, 7, 11, and 13, were extremely important to Sarah. And they also appeared in a lot of the stuff that Francis Bacon did. Numbers, symbols, labyrinths were all part of secret societies and Freemasonry at the time, lending so many people to believe that this was one of the bases for Sarah's designs, that her upbringing, education, and travel as an adult all led her down that path. Now, you can go down that path, or you can go down the supernatural path. When you look at the house itself, the original 8-room farmhouse grew into the world's most unusual and sprawling mansion. It included 7 stories prior to the 1908 earthquake. When that hit, you lost 3 stories. It's been 4 stories ever since. Roughly 161 rooms, including 40 bedrooms. The reason I say roughly is because, again, no formal plans exist. So no one knows exactly how many rooms existed prior to the earthquake or how many secret rooms might still be hidden behind a wall or a door somewhere. There's 2 ballrooms, one completed and one unfinished, 47 fireplaces, over 10,000 panes of glass, 17 chimneys with evidence of 2 others, chimney, 2 basement levels and 3 elevators. It's 24,000 square feet. It has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 52 skylights, 47 stairways, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens. So it's crazy. To this day, the Winchester Mystery House is considered one of the most haunted places in the world. The 3rd floor is reported to be the hotspot for the majority of haunted activity. Ghosts have been seen throughout the house's long history. One of the most famous ones is the wheelbarrow ghost. He has been seen pushing a wheelbarrow, and sometimes people say it's full of coal. Others, it's full of ash. But they have seen him pushing it through the grand ballroom and the basement, all over the place. Visitors who go there for tours, because you can take tours, have reported someone tugging on their shirt to get their attention. Women have said that someone's tugging on their skirt, and when they turn, there's no one there. Tour guides report bring people into a room, and they'll start talking, and then they'll hear other people in the hallway. They'll go out to get them and bring them in because everybody's supposed to stay together, and there's nobody there. Or they'll go out and they'll see a shadow go around the corner. And they'll go after the shadow to a long hallway, and the hallway's empty and there's no one there. Footsteps can often be heard on the 3rd floor when there's nothing going on up there. There's no tours. That's where the servants all stayed. And a lot of people think that when the servants died, they just hung around. They never left. When you're on the 3rd floor, that's where people say it's the creepiest, spookiest vibe in the world. It just feels weird. It feels closed in. It's very, very quiet. And the quiet is so intense that you can't actually hear anything else going on in the house, even when there's other tours going on. What's funny is the other tours can hear you, but you can't hear them, is what people report. When you're on that 3rd floor, it's just intensely quiet and uncomfortable. This will make Shannon smile. Shadow figures and shapes can often be seen throughout the whole house. They'll be turning corners or moving down hallways, appearing in windows, and occasionally in the gardens surrounding the property. In 2017, they had set up security cameras to protect the place. And an exterior security camera around the witching hour caught a mysterious floating light on one of the mansion's balconies in the middle of the night. And the doors are supposedly alarmed. So if someone had gone out the door, it would have set off an alarm. That never happened. There's just this light floating across the balcony and then floats back and disappears. You can see that online. There are lots of reports of people taking photographs while visiting the mansion. And when they actually look at them, they see odd shadows and shapes in spots. Some report shadow figures, some report orbs and other lights where there should be none. There's even on the main website for the Winchester Mystery House, their marketing person was taking shots to use for the website. And when he starts going through them, he finds one where it looks like someone's standing in one of the supposedly empty windows when there's no one in there. You might like this. It was the inspiration for Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
It has been featured in several novels, plays, TV shows. Paranormal investigations have been done there. A fecer film starring Helen Mirren as Sarah Winchester happened a couple of years back.
That was a very bad movie. I saw that in the theater. I felt bad for Helen Mirren after seeing that movie.
An episode of Mythbusters happened there. They went and explored the place. The Lore podcast has been there, and the 100th episode of American Horror Story featured the Winchester Mystery House. So lots of stuff going on there. Whether she built it to contain and soothe the souls of people who were killed by the Winchester rifles, or to satisfy and prove some mathematical or chemical theories is still a mystery. We don't know. But we do know that the Winchester Mystery House remains a focal point for a lot of people to this day. It's like a destination, a haunted destination for them and for anybody interested in the paranormal.
Well, now I want to go.
Oh, I wanted to go there for freaking ever since I was a teenager and knew about it. So
I wanted to go since I was 13 and took that first trip to San Jose.
Yeah, I think we need to plan a little mini writers retreat, just us three, and go.
Okay.
Because you can stay there. A couple of years ago is when they first opened it up to actually being able to stay overnight there. So that's pretty new.
Well, yeah, and for the longest time, her actual bedroom was sealed off.
Wow.
And they opened it a couple of years ago, and they said after they opened it, the paranormal activity spiked, and there was lots of stuff going on. So they don't know if they let something out.
Awesome. See, I figure when you do all this confusing stuff, you actually just trap the ghost in the house. And they couldn't get out because they were like, what? No, this door doesn't.
I would think that would piss them off.
And that's why there's a dude with a wheelbarrow that's like in the basement and in the ballroom, because why does he need that? He doesn't. He just can't get back to the conservatory.
Well, there's also a picture of a lot of the workers together, and one of them died, and he has been seen on the property quite a bit.
I bet.
So he never left either.
If you worked there, like that would be good steady work, probably, as long as she was still paying you and she was making bank, so she could keep paying.
Almost 40 years.
Yeah. So why not? If you're a contractor and you get that gig, do it. You know she's going to change shit on you all the time, which will be frustrating, but she's going to pay for it, so whatever.
And one last weird little fact about it. MB was talking about all the photographs of homes, right, that are out there.
Yeah.
There are very few photographs or images of Sarah Winchester. There's one taken of her late in life that they actually have on the main website, and it's a candid shot someone took of her in a carriage. But other than that, there's only like a few when she was quite younger. And I find that interesting because, again, that's that late 19th century, early 20th century, and photography was very popular. Yes, you know, people were getting their pictures taken, not her.
No. I wonder if there was a reason behind it. Maybe she thought that it would capture your spirit.
That's what I'm wondering.
Because, yeah.
That was a belief.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
It's a great story.
The whole thing, that's the thing. It's one of those things that captures people early on, right? Especially people who like all the old ghost stories, kind of, because the whole thing behind ghost stories tends to be there's a people story behind it.
Yeah.
That's why you want to hear about the source of the haunting on tours, not just there's a ghost here. You're like, yeah, believe for the ghost. But it's when they have these
but why
stories and they're little snapshots of time and of a life. But with her, obviously triple fascinating. And obviously she had a lot of guilt over being associated with the Winchester rifles, even though it wasn't technically her company there initially.
Don't you think it could have triggered the guilt, losing her only child and then losing her husband?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel she had to have felt uncomfortable with what the company was before that, for that to happen. So I think that she was already uncomfortable with it. Like, this is what I'm living off of, is the blood of all these people.
Yes. Which would actually put her well ahead of her time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she specifically addressed being aware of how many, say, natives it had killed, for example. I mean, she addressed that. So she was really ahead of her times. She was also just paranoid and cray-cray, which is unfortunate.
And rich as God.
Yeah. And, I'm sorry, that means she was eccentric. You have to remember, if you're rich, it's eccentricity, not insanity.
Not Dr. Bananas.
Slip of the tongue. So sorry.
Well, and one other kind of interesting note is that her time abroad in Europe is not documented. Like, there's hardly anything talking about what she did when she was in Europe. And that's interesting to me.
She kept well for a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
Kept to herself.
And there was so much going on again with secret societies and mysticism. Who knows what she was doing? I mean, she could have been taking a supernatural tour.
That's very true.
Finding out about this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. For her research to do it. Or, just meeting with secret societies like you do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
As one does. All right. So the theme really wasn't like just houses with what you two came up. They were two houses specifically built for things. And I spent longer trying to find something that was applicable than I did actually researching what I finally went, fuck it, and chose as my topic. So I'm going to be doing the LaLaurie Mansion, which was also a murder house. But I can't say that it was specifically built for it, but maybe it was. Sources: Wikipedia, New Orleans Historical, All That's Interesting, and Historic Mysteries.com. All right, so we're going to start with a woman named Marie Delphine McCarthy. And it originally was probably McCarthy and then was shortened down to McCarty when they came to the U.S. But she was born March 19th, 1787 in New Orleans. Her grandfather had come to New Orleans from Ireland around 1730 when the French owned the colony. And her mother was, I believe, French. It was Spanish Louisiana when she was born, though, which I hadn't even known the Spanish had really owned it. If you go there, you've got the French Quarter, and I guess you don't pay attention to anything else. So I can't even say definitively that there aren't signs of the Spanish ownership at some point somewhere else, because I've only really been to the French Quarter. She was brought up in high society and was considered to be charming, beautiful, graceful. She did everything properly. She knew how to behave.
You.
Yes, absolutely. To give an idea for the background behind her prominence in New Orleans society, she had an uncle, Esteban. I love that name, and I don't know why, but I always have. Esteban Rodriguez Miro, who was governor of Louisiana and Florida. I was like, that's a strange commute from 1785 to 1791. So it seems to me that those two were those Spanish owned at the time and that the states in between were not, but I didn't look it up. And a cousin, Augustin de McCarty, who was mayor of New Orleans from 1815 to 1820. In addition, she married 3 prominent men in her life. The first was Don Ramon de Lopez y Anglo, who was, there's so many fun words, who was a caballero de la Royal de Carlos, which the short version is he was a high-ranking Spanish royal officer.
Okay. I was going to say, what's that when it's at home with its feet up?
I'm just seeing
Don Diego de la Vega.
The Tres Caballeros. Okay.
Don Diego de la Vega.
Yeah. In June 1800, she was 13 years old when she married him.
Oh,
as happens. He died in Havana while they were on their way to Madrid for a Spanish court appearance because he had been given the position of consul general of the territory of Orleans. She had her first daughter within days of his death, and she ended up taking her and moving back to New Orleans. She remarried a prominent banker, merchant lawyer, and legislator named Jean Blanc in 1808 at about the age of 21. Before his death in 1816, they had 4 kids together. So her third husband is where we get her infamous name, and he was her final husband, Leonard Louis Nicholas LaLaurie. He was a physician. He was younger than her. She was, of course, the older woman at a whole whopping 38-ish years old. They had 1 child together during their time. Having already been widowed twice, she was a well-off property owner in her own right. And she actually was the one who purchased the infamous property where that mansion would be built at 1140 Royal Street. And it sounded like there was already a house kind of being built, and she moved in and made it what she wanted it to be, finished that. I think it took a couple of years, and then she moved in. They all moved in. But her husband was gone a lot, so she was just kind of left to her own devices. She was a business owner. She did her own stuff. And if she wasn't a psycho, she actually could have been being talked about now just for being a successful woman in her own right. So ultimately it would be built as a 2-story mansion with attached slave quarters and be the tallest house in the area with a view of the Vieux Carré. It was over 10,000 square feet. It's a big puppy. Before we get to the infamous portions of the story, there were some extra little things that I ended up kind of going just sideways on for a while for my own interests. There were ongoing patterns of slave revolts happening at the time, we really don't hear much about the revolts, like every once in a while we do. But the first one started when she was 4 years old, and it was the Haitian Revolution in 1791. It inspired slaves elsewhere to band together. And in New Orleans, they created a community called the Mina community. And the Mina was their origins. There were a couple of people that belonged to it that were from a different group, but it was mainly this community in general that were Mina. It was referred to as the Mina conspiracy because it was thought they were planning things and everything. There was also the 1794 Point Coupier conspiracy and the 1811 German Coast uprising. So apparently these things happening every few years had the collective effect of making slave owners believe harsh discipline was necessary to keep their slaves in line and prevent them from revolting. So they became even harsher during this time, basically, because of it. Which I'm like, okay, the opposite to me, the more you're going to abuse them, the more chance you're going to make them want to revolt.
Exactly. Yeah.
Instead of say, oh, I don't know, being kind. So they're like, I can get through this. In addition, her uncle was murdered by his slaves in 1771. So 20 years before the Haitian Revolution, obviously before she was born, but I'm sure this was a family story, a warning that they passed down, a cautionary tale, so to speak, about slave ownership. So that was just kind of background for me. Like, all right, it seems to me that she was brought into this with this whole don't be good to your slaves mentality. It's dangerous. Don't be good to them. So we return to the 1830s. Delphine is a slave owner. Reports have said her slaves looked wretched, haggard. They did not look good. People were worried about their welfare, which that kind of makes me laugh. But anyway, in public, she was polite to Black people, is a quote, and she treated her slaves well in public. Like nobody ever actually saw her abusing them. She behaved appropriately when she was around other people, which obviously she was a society woman. She knew how to behave in high society and in front of people. But between 1830 and 1834, 12 of her slaves are documented to have died, including a cook, laundress, and all 4 of her children. Her name was Bon or Bonnie. It's Bonne. And Delphine had bought her from a Saint Domingan refugee with the understanding that she was a chronic runaway. So I imagine, because it said it in the paperwork, the purchase paperwork. And so once again, I imagine this reinforced for her. She's a chronic runaway. We have to be steel hand, iron hand, whatever. There is no record of their causes of death. And it was not all at once. It wasn't like they were all wiped out in one fell swoop. They died between 1831 and 1833. None of them died at the same time. Interestingly, she freed 2 of her slaves, one in 1819 and one in 1832. Doesn't say why. It just seems so out of character to me that she would have freed 2 slaves. I think they were both male, but that's as much as we know. People were so concerned about the appearance of her slaves and witness incidents that a lawyer was sent to her house to remind her of the slave laws. Because unlike other areas, I don't know if it was New Orleans specific or Louisiana specific, they actually did have treatment laws there. For things that you were not allowed to do to your slaves. And
yeah, do you remember, or did you ever read about the law about lobsters?
No.
So lobsters, it's funny how things get inverted. Now lobster is considered a delicacy, right? Yeah, and is expensive. It's expensive to buy lobster and eat lobster. It's a rich person's food, kind of, sort of. In slavery days, lobsters were so abundant, they were used to feed slaves. It was not considered a rich person's food. It was considered just, it was chicken. Right. And a law was passed that you had to give your slaves something other than lobster all the time. It wasn't good for them.
Okay. If only they knew.
Yeah.
What they were eating at the time. Jeez. So that lawyer went there and visited her and went over the rules with her, but he also left saying he saw no evidence of mistreatment while he was there. But again, what was she going to do? Whip them in front of him? No. Yeah. It's rumored that it's not even rumored. So I thought that was funny. So she kept a cook chained in the oven repeatedly. So this story that's going to come back, but it wasn't just the one cook this was done to. This is consistently
in the oven or to the oven?
In the kitchen to the oven by her ankle. So this was a thing she did. You're the cook. You're going to be here in the kitchen. At night, she was always chained
Wow.
Okay. So a young female slave was witnessed to have fled off the roof while being chased by Delphine with a whip. The neighbor who directly witnessed it covered her eyes when she saw the girl on the ledge. So it's not actually known whether she jumped, fell, or was pushed by her mistress. And there were varying accounts. Her age was between 8 and 12. The earliest accounts, the first witness account, she thought she was 8. It was rumored that she'd been brushing Delphine's hair and had hit a snag, and that it pissed off Delphine because, it hurt. Oh, so terribly. And so Delphine went into a rage and she chased her with the whip. Either way, the child went off the roof and hit the sidewalk and was killed. And it was seen by people. The body was seen by a lot of people, but that neighbor's the only one who reported it and is documented to have seen it happening. Because of the public death, Delphine and her husband were investigated and they were found guilty of illegal cruelty in 1828. Wow. Interestingly, there is no court case that could be found, but there is legal documentation. So I don't know if this was like a settled out of court type thing where they were like, all right, you do this as your punishment and we're going to let this go. But anyway, they were fined $300 and 9 of their slaves had to be forfeited. Of course, they just went and had a relative rebuy the 9 slaves and snuck them back into their house in the middle of the night. It was claimed that she would beat her own daughters if they tried to feed the slaves. In fact, the 2 daughters who lived in the infamous mansion at the time, she had more children than that, but only 2 lived there. They were said to not look well either. So that's interesting. I didn't find that about anything else with the children at any other time. So I don't know if this was kind of an ultimate degradation of something going on with her mentally, that she would suddenly be abusing her children, because other than that, she was said to adore her children and that always, again, be kind to them in public. And it was just these 2 that were reported, though, not looking good. So everything that I put in here is from reports and writings that came out after the events that we're going to hit here in a moment. The deaths and legal issues were officially documented in funeral registers, legal records, etc. So that's how we have that information. So we move forward to April 10th, 1834, when a fire started in the kitchen of the LaLaurie Mansion. I think it was the middle of the night. Neighbors come over to try and help do the whole water bucket brigade thing. Police and fire authorities respond. Upon their arrival, they find a cook chained to the stove by her ankle in the kitchen. She would later admit to starting the fire. She said it was to try and kill herself because she was in trouble. And if she was taken to the upper room, she'd never come back. So at that point, to her, it was better to die in fire, chained to the stove, than to have to deal with what was coming next. The officials tried to get the keys to the slave quarters to make sure everyone was out, get everybody out of the house, but the LaLauries refused to give them the keys. So some people broke down the door, and inside the quarters, that's where they found, and this is a quote from the New Orleans Bee article on April 11th, the next day, 7 slaves, more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by the neck with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to another. They had been in there for months, apparently. Interestingly, the number was put at 9 in many of the articles. And so that makes me wonder if it was not the same 9 slaves that they had purchased back, but nobody knows. Like it wasn't said that they were.
Had to forfeit?
Yes.
Okay.
It makes sense to me, but there is nothing saying that that's what it was. It could just be a coincidence that it was that number. Judge Jean-Francois Canonge was one of the rescuers, and during a deposition, he reported one slave woman with an iron collar, another woman with a deep head wound. Being a judge, he actually spoke to Mr. LaLaurie about it, and his response was, quote, "Some people had better stay at home rather than come to others' houses to dictate laws and meddle with other people's business." So I just wanted to add there at the end, America. So varying reports said the slaves were emaciated, that they'd obviously been whipped repeatedly. They were scarred from that. They had iron collars with spikes that had been employed so they couldn't rest. It was also mentioned that at least one did have a hole through the skull, but it's hard to tell if this is accurate. It's also said that they were scarred and infested with worms, parasites, and open wounds, that there was a stool of some sort or a platform that she would actually stand on over them to whip them from above because she felt she could get more oomph behind it. Yeah. News leaked what had been found, and a mob flooded the house and tore it apart.
Wow.
One report said the slaves were put on display so people could come see how horrifying their treatment was, but I only found that in one place, and it referenced 4,000 people, which in many other articles is the number of people they said would ultimately come down in the house and tear it apart. So, I don't know. 2 of the rescued slaves died within days of being removed from the house. Bodies were found in the yard and the well, though numbers vary from 2 to 100 in the reports. The LaLauries fled to France. They actually got on a boat that night, got to Mobile, Alabama, and then went from there to France. They would spend the rest of their lives there. Her kids reported that she was determined to return to New Orleans. She felt that she wasn't in the wrong and that she should be able to go to her home, right? Because that was her home. That's where she'd been born. They were able to talk her out of it. So she died in Paris. It's kind of questioned for sure, but there's multiple things that point to it, including a death certificate and a plaque in a cemetery there that has the wrong year. So accounts seem to point to her having died December 7th, 1849 at age 62. No cause of death is mentioned. It is rumored that her body was brought back to New Orleans and entombed in the Blanc family plot in St. Louis Cemetery number 1. So nobody knows for sure where her body is, but this is a big rumor. It's popular in New Orleans. The house remained in ruins for years until Pierre Trestor rebuilt it in 1838 or thereabouts. There wasn't a specific year. It served many uses, including a public high school, an all-girls school, home for delinquents, conservatory, furniture store, apartments, and is now owned by a private owner. It turns out the last one I could find was a Texas oil tycoon. He does not give tours for the dark tourists that flock to it. In fact, it sounds like he's kind of pissy about the fact that it's a big tourist spot. And it's like, well, did you not research the most notorious house in New Orleans before you bought it? But yeah, I went there. I have like pictures from outside, but you don't mess with the house, and their signs saying, do not knock on the door. No, you're not welcome.
I believe that's the same guy that wanted to buy a place in Memphis called Graceland because he liked the gates, but he didn't know the history.
Right? Yeah, good. Most of the accounts people know these days are false and were blown up version perpetrated by several novelists after 1945. So about 15 years after this went down, a little less, all of a sudden there was this explosion of like novels and stories, and they were really exaggerating what happened. And
damn writers.
I know. That's what most people know. And that's what was in, say, American Horror Story when they did a whole season based with Kathy Bates as LaLaurie. So examples of the things that people have frequently heard, so you know these are not true, were that a slave had her limbs broken and badly rehealed, so she moved like a crab, that one man had his intestines pulled out and wrapped around his body like a belt, slaves with holes in their heads where their brains had been stirred with a wooden spoon that was set nearby so she could do it regularly, I guess. Medical experiments galore, like they said that these people were, that's one of the big themes that you'll see in media, is that these were medical experiments. And it's funny because they were perpetrated by her, but her husband was a doctor. And then also there was a woman who had her limbs removed and that her skin had been peeled off in circles so that she looked like a caterpillar. Really? There's no basis of fact for any of these claims. And I want to say that I think that the actual treatment of the slaves was reprehensible and horrific enough on its own without us exaggerating it. Mm-hmm. It was still awful. Even if she just had them locked up and was whipping them, it was still awful, period. So, random side note, Nicolas Cage bought the mansion in, I think it was 2006, and lost it to foreclosure in 2008 or 9. Yeah, he bought it at one point. And then his financial issues hit him. So, and I'm sure he bought it knowing what it was. The mansion is said to be haunted by the ghosts of the slaves and is notorious in New Orleans for its past. Many of the local ghost tours make a point of swinging by the mansion, if not all of them. And tour guides have personal stories of hauntings that occurred on the sidewalk on previous tours since they're not allowed to go in, such as one guide saying that he mentioned, it said that the little girl's name that got chased off the roof was named Leah. And supposedly when he was saying her name, a street light that had been burned out for weeks came on. And then when he said it again, the light went back out. It actually blew out. and things like invisible entities pulling on their bags and their clothes and stuff while they stand outside the mansion. Again, it's not the same mansion. The first one mostly burned down. If you're interested in reading more about it, there is a book that was written only a couple years after it happened by a woman who went there and researched it and talked to people. And I think that's the best that anybody can expect to get about the truth behind it. It is Retrospective Western Travel, Volume 1. So it's not only about it, but it features in it by Harriet Martineau. And that was put out in 1838. She actually had come, she was traveling. I mean, it's a retrospective Western travel. She was traveling there and she saw this house in ruins that nobody was going near, that hadn't been fixed. And she started asking about it. And that's where she started getting more of the story. So she was able to pull stuff from newspapers. She was able to talk to authorities and neighbors and such to get the information. So I'm, again, betting that's the most accurate you can get, so that when that flood of books came out in the 1940s, that's when everything was being made up. So while there are other books, I'm not going to recommend them because they're bullshit. Slander. I didn't name anybody specific though. So,
but there's a different parallel in that you said she grew up in a privileged, well-to-do background.
Yeah.
And Holmes, H.H. Holmes, had a lovely upbringing. His family was well off, and yet they turned to being so cruel and sadistic to other human beings for apparently no reason.
Well, the thing is, one wonders, did she continue any of that treatment of anybody when she was in New Orleans? Apparently all but one of her kids moved out there and lived in France with her in Paris. So it's like, you can't be that cruel and then just
turn it off,
be a great person and not ever be nasty to anybody else again. Although I understand that there's a difference in that slaves were not viewed as human beings. So I get that there could have been a mental difference there, and she wouldn't behave that way towards, say, other society people. And her children stayed with her as adults. So apparently she wasn't abusing them, but it's just, that's a lot to turn off.
Yeah. And that was a common theme in the South, unfortunately, that slaves were less than human.
Oh yeah.
It's also how people, as they were moving west, looked at indigenous people and the American Indians, right? They were less than human. Yeah. Therefore, it's okay to kill them. And there was tons of stories written, right? The penny saver kind of stories and the things that made cowboys famous always portrayed American Indians as heathens and beasts and
they were animals.
Yeah, they're just animals to be taken down. I mean, that's unfortunately how that works. It actually also sometimes now happens with militaries, right? When you go to war, they have to dehumanize the enemy, so that soldiers can effectively kill.
Well, and of course, we still have a contingent in America that does that too. Anybody who's a person of color, we're seeing it heavily with, say, people from Mexico, right? There's still a dehumanizing element that happens. That is always something that has fascinated and horrified me, how you can look at another person and treat them like they're not human.
Yeah. And in her case, she probably justified things in her mind by going, well, these aren't people.
Absolutely. And her husband, apparently he just kind of stood by the side and let her do whatever with him, but he was certainly defensive when he was spoken to about it. What happens in our home isn't your business.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it is when you're treating people like animals and murdering them. And they buried that little girl, Leah, we'll call her, since that's the only name that's been given to her, in their backyard in the middle of the night, even after that public spectacle. Because that same neighbor reported seeing them bringing her body out that night and burying her. So, she didn't even get put in, I don't know, a cemetery. I don't know if they would have I actually don't know how slaves' bodies would have been disposed of. I doubt there were cemeteries for them. So what happened with that? I actually don't know. Now I want to look that up. So anyway, this sent me in so many different directions that I was like, focus.
I bet. Yeah.
Later.
I'm wondering if there was something akin to, maybe this is how Pauper's Fields got started.
That was the only thing I could think of. is that there would be something like that. Like, all right, this is where we buried the slaves, and we're not even going to put they probably didn't even have tombstones or any markers or anything. It was probably body on body on body if something like that existed. But yeah, it struck me. I just don't know. Like I've heard. So something I wanted to look up.
Somebody we know knows.
That's right. Who. We'll put it out there. Somebody tell us. Feel free to write us.
Somebody please educate us.
So I wanted to tell you guys one more story if you've got a minute.
Okay.
Because as part of your show, you've shared a lot of personal experiences that you've had with paranormal stuff. I only have one, and I don't remember it because I was a baby.
Patrick.
I was a baby. My mom used to tell this story though. So my mom had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and both brothers died rather young. One had MS and was in a wheelchair. The other was a Vietnam vet, and he died shortly after I was born. And Mom would tell me the story. She's like, "Yeah, your Uncle Randall came to check on you after he died." And I was like, "Really?" Please do go on. And she said that she'd gotten the news that he had died, and someone had called her, and I was there, and I was being a fussy baby and crying and stuff, and she decided to lay down on the couch with me and closed her eyes, and when she did, the door opened, and she heard someone walk in and say, "Hey, Susie, how are things going with the baby?" And it was her brother, Uncle Randall. And she started to get up, and he said, "No, don't get up and don't open your eyes. If you do, I'll have to leave." He said, "I just wanted you to know that, everything's okay, but I want to check on the baby and see how the baby was doing because he's been so fussy." And she said, "Well, he's right here and he's quieted down. I miss you and I wish you hadn't gone. And, can't you stick around a little longer?" And he said, "No, they gave me enough time to come check on the baby."
Aww.
And she said, "Well, I want to see you." And he says, "You can't. If you open your eyes, I'll have to leave." And she did it anyway. She opened her eyes and there was nobody there. But she used to tell that story all the time about how Uncle Randall came to check on me as a baby.
That's sweet. I have something similar in that my grandpa died when my mom was 7 months pregnant with me, my dad's dad. And so he had already been on dialysis. He already had issues with that. And then he found out he had cancer, and he said, I'm not doing chemo on top of dialysis. This isn't a life. And so he decided he was done, and he went off the dialysis. But he made a point of kissing my mom's stomach and saying bye, and that he'd meet me later before he basically pulled his own plug, right? Before he pulled everything, stopped doing the dialysis. And my mom said, she talks somebody much like my dad. His dad was a shit, right? He was a smart ass. He liked to joke around. And she said he would constantly wake me up. I would be dead asleep and he would wake me up and then play with me all night. And it would drive her nuts. And she had stories about how she knew it was him and all the different things he did. So I heard the same kind of like stories from this grandpa that I never got to meet, but that apparently is the one who made my dad such a smart ass, who then made me a smart ass. So it was always good.
Well, I don't have any experience with being a smart ass, so
No.
I don't know what you're talking about.
He's
Not
super serious. I know. I don't know how we put up with it, actually.
Stand to be around us.
And then I did tell MB this, after Mom passed, because Mom passed recently. I turned on the radio, and when I say radio, usually I mean Spotify.
Yeah.
And I turned on Spotify, and I have a playlist called Comfort Food, and I turned that on and I hit play, and the first song was Tedeschi Trucks Band doing "Lord Protect My Child," and I hit stop and I went, "Really, Mom? Really?" And so I skipped it and I hit play, and then I heard Kansas, Carry On My Wayward Son. And I'm like, all right, I'm done. Stopped it. Can't listen to music right now.
I get it. I'm not gonna let you go forward with it. That's right. It's always good to have the little visits.
It is.
Speaking of, this has been fun.
Yeah,
except for all the depressing parts.
I know. So let's talk about some sad, demented people.
Yes.
They all were demented in their own ways. Mine was dark way to end it too.
But it's better than talking about all the dark, demented people we actually know in common.
That's true. And that could get us in trouble and I'd have to edit it. And I don't want to have to do that.
Oh, we could ask, have you ever been in a haunted house?
Have we asked that before?
I don't think we have.
All right. Well, that's what we'll ask. Or have you ever visited one of the infamous haunted houses?
Okay.
There's plenty of them. I mean, has anybody been to Savannah or New Orleans and done a ghost tour?
Well, you guys have done the Stanley quite often.
Oh, yeah.
I did.
I know other people have.
Regular.
I did the ghost tour at the Stanley.
I've wanted to do that. I just haven't done it.
It's fun. Here's my ultimate retirement age goal is to live somewhere in the vicinity of Estes Park. It's expensive to live in Estes Park.
Yeah.
And work at the Stanley doing the tours, both the history and the ghost ones.
I've also heard I thought it was you that had said this. Maybe it was somebody else talked about buying a haunted house somewhere and doing writer retreats.
No, but I mean, I think I post
that.
about it with like the For the Love of Old Houses thing all the time, but I didn't actually want to do like a haunted one. So it was somebody else.
It was somebody else. I'll have to think about who.
That person.
Yeah.
So we'll close it up. That's the question. We'll post it.
Yes.
This airs. So anybody can send us stories. You can do that at mysteriesmonstersmayhem@gmail.com or use the form on our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com. It's a mouthful. Why'd we choose that?
I don't know,
because it sounded good at the time.
It did. It sounded so good.
And in the meantime, thank you, Patrick, for coming on and chatting with us. We, of course, always have fun, and we get to see you soon at Mile Icon in person. Yay! And thank you to everybody who tunes in and listens. Please rate, like, share, all that good stuff. Review. It does help get people. And hey, if you have author friends or favorite authors, it helps when you review those books too and share them.
Yes.
Because nobody's a millionaire. So thank you all for sticking around, and we'll see you next week. Well, with our voices. Bye.
Yes, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.